The evening air was cold, a biting chill that cut through the streets of the city. A grand office building stood tall, its sleek glass walls reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Inside, the boardroom was buzzing with the usual tension as the CEO prepared for another meeting. His gaze was sharp, his mind always focused on the numbers, the bottom line. But today, something was different. He looked out the window, briefly distracted by the city lights, and then his eyes caught sight of a figure below. A young girl stood on the sidewalk, holding a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. She was small, dressed in a worn-out jacket, her shoes scuffed from the cold pavement. She was looking up at the building, seemingly lost in thought. The CEO couldn't help but notice her, her presence somehow out of place against the backdrop of luxury and power that surrounded him. His phone rang, snapping him out of his reverie, and he turned to attend to the call. But something about the girl lingered in his mind. Minutes later, he stood outside the building, his breath fogging up in the chilly night air. He was about to leave when he spotted her again, still standing there, the paper now tightly clutched in her hand. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Curiosity led him to walk over. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice more curious than harsh. The girl jumped slightly, startled by his presence. Her eyes widened, but she didn't run. Instead, she looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and uncertainty. "I'm looking for my mom," she said softly. "I thought she might be here." The CEO raised an eyebrow, surprised by the response. "Your mom?" he asked, unsure how to respond. "You don't belong here," he continued, though his voice softened slightly. The girl, though visibly nervous, held her ground. "I know. I'm just looking for her. She used to work here," she said quietly. The CEO froze for a moment, his mind racing. He knew every corner of his building, every office. He had never heard of anyone like her. "Who is your mom?" he asked, now genuinely curious. The girl hesitated for a moment, then spoke the name. "Ruth. Ruth Carter." She worked in the building. The name struck him like a lightning bolt. Ruth, the woman who had worked for him years ago, the one who had disappeared without a trace, the woman who had always been kind, always ready to help. "I think you have the wrong place," the CEO said, his voice trembling slightly. "She's gone, but I—" Before he could finish his sentence, the girl looked up at him again, her eyes clear and determined. "I'm not giving up. I know she's here somewhere," she said, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes, a spark of hope, something that reminded him of Ruth herself. It was in that moment that he realized the girl wasn't just another lost soul. There was something deeper, something that connected her to him in a way he couldn't yet understand. And with that thought, he knew the evening had just begun to change in ways he never expected. The CEO stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing as the girl spoke Ruth's name. The weight of the name hung in the air between them, heavy with memories he hadn't thought about in years. Ruth, his former housekeeper, the woman who had worked for him and his family long ago, a kind soul who had quietly slipped out of his life without explanation. But now, here was this young girl, standing in front of him, saying that Ruth was her mother. The CEO's thoughts swirled with confusion, and for a moment, he wasn't sure whether to believe what she was saying. "Ruth?" he repeated, his voice soft. The girl nodded, her face serious. "Yes, she's my mom. She used to work here." The CEO felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at her. Could it be possible? Could this child really be Ruth's daughter? He stared at her for a moment longer, noticing the way her eyes held a quiet determination, a sense of hope that he wasn't used to seeing in people. It was then that he realized that this wasn't just some coincidence. There was something in her eyes that made him feel like this encounter was more than just chance. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't know how to explain this, but Ruth, she's not here anymore. She left a long time ago." The girl's face fell slightly, but she quickly recovered, lifting her chin with renewed resolve. "I know she left, but she promised me she'd be back. She said she'd come for me. I just have to wait here. I know it." The CEO's heart softened. He could hear the vulnerability in her voice, the hope that hadn't quite been extinguished. He had heard stories of people like this, people who clung to the belief that someone would come back for them, even when the world told them to let go. He wanted to tell her that Ruth was long gone, that there was no way she could come back. But something about her made him pause. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Anna, the girl said, looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. I'm Anna. The CEO nodded slowly, his mind still racing. Anna. He had never met anyone quite like her before. She was so young, yet there was a wisdom in her eyes that belied her age. She didn't seem afraid, just hopeful, as though she had all the time in the world to wait for the one person who had promised to come back. He knew he should walk away, tell her that she was wrong, that Ruth wasn't coming back. But for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he found himself reaching for his phone, pulling up the number of Ruth's old friend, someone who might know where she had gone, someone who might have the answers. As he dialed the number, Anna watched him silently, her eyes never leaving his face. The phone rang several times before a voice on the other end answered. Hello? The voice said, familiar but distant. The CEO cleared his throat. Hi, it's Jonathan. I'm looking for Ruth. Do you know where she went? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The voice sighed. Ruth, she left years ago. No one really knows where she went. She just disappeared one day, without a word. I'm sorry, Jonathan, but I don't have any answers for you. The CEO's heart sank. He felt a wave of disappointment wash over him, but he didn't let it show. He thanked the person on the other end of the line and hung up. When he turned back to Anna, he saw that her hopeful expression had dimmed slightly. I'm sorry, Anna, he said softly, the words feeling like a weight in his chest. I don't know where your mom is, but I promise you, I'll help you find her. Anna looked at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and relief. She nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of trust in her eyes. The CEO couldn't explain it, but in that moment, something shifted inside him. He couldn't walk away from this, not after seeing the hope in Anna's eyes. He made a silent promise to himself that he wouldn't let this go. He would help her find Ruth, no matter what it took. The CEO sat in his office, staring out the window, his mind still spinning from the conversation with Anna. The air was cool against his skin, but his thoughts were even colder. He had made a promise to her, a promise to help find Ruth, but as the hours passed, the weight of that promise began to settle heavily on his shoulders. What could he possibly do? Ruth had disappeared without a trace years ago. How was he supposed to find her? The silence in the room felt oppressive as he sat, lost in thought. He turned back to look at Anna, who was sitting quietly in the corner, waiting patiently. She hadn't said much since the phone call ended, but her eyes were still filled with hope. It was the kind of hope that people only had when they were truly desperate. He knew that feeling all too well. It was the kind of hope he had seen in people who had lost everything, but still believed that something good could happen. He couldn't shake the feeling that this little girl, with her quiet determination, was somehow linked to a part of his life he had long since buried. He took a deep breath, pushing the thoughts away. Anna, he finally said, breaking the silence, how about we go find somewhere warm to sit and talk? You've been waiting long enough. She looked up at him, and for the first time, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. I'm okay, she said softly. I can wait here. The CEO smiled back, a brief flash of warmth crossing his face. I don't think so, he said. You've been standing out there in the cold long enough. Come on, let's go. He led her to a small cafe nearby, a cozy spot he frequented when he needed to think. The familiar smell of coffee and pastries filled the air as they entered, and for a moment, the weight of the outside world seemed to fade. They sat at a corner table, the soft hum of conversation around them providing a soothing backdrop. The CEO sat back in his chair, taking a long sip of his coffee. He looked at Anna, who was quietly watching him, her hands folded in front of her. You really think your mom's here? He asked, his voice gentle but tinged with uncertainty. Anna nodded, her eyes bright, with the same determination he had seen earlier. I know she is, she said firmly. She told me she'd come back. The CEO studied her for a moment, then sighed. He had to admit that there was something about Anna's belief, something pure and unwavering, that made him want to help. He could see how much she cared, how deeply she wanted to believe in something, in someone. All right, he said, setting his cup down. I'll help you, Anna. We'll figure this out together. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since they had met, her face softened with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know how much this means to me." The CEO smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He didn't know how much it meant to her, but he could imagine. What kind of person would Ruth have been to raise a child like this? A child with so much hope, so much belief in the good in the world. His mind wandered back to Ruth. She had always been kind, always patient, a woman who had taken care of his home like it was her own. He remembered the way she had taken care of his wife when she was ill, the way she had helped with his children. Ruth had been a part of his life for so long, but he had never truly understood how much she had sacrificed until now. "We'll start by asking around," he said, more to himself than to Anna. "There has to be someone who knows where she went." Anna nodded again, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I think that's a good idea," she said quietly. "But I don't think she's far. I just have this feeling that she's close." The CEO smiled at her once more. It was the kind of smile that was meant to reassure, but he didn't know if he was convincing her or himself. "We'll find her," he said, with a confidence he didn't quite feel. The day was fading into night as they left the cafe, the streets illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. The CEO couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as they walked, a feeling that had nothing to do with the cool air or the time of day. It was the feeling of being caught in something he didn't fully understand, something that was beyond his control. He had made a promise to Anna, and now he had to keep it. He would find Ruth, no matter what it took. But as they walked down the street together, he couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would change them both forever. The next morning, the CEO and Anna set out together, walking through the bustling city streets. It was early, and the air had a crisp edge to it, signaling the change of seasons. The sun had just risen, casting a soft golden light over the skyline, but the streets were already busy with people heading to work. Despite the energy of the city around them, there was a quiet tension in the air. Anna walked closely beside the CEO, her small steps matching his long strides. She didn't speak much, but her presence seemed to fill the space between them. It was as if she knew something he didn't, something important. The CEO glanced down at her from time to time, surprised at how much he had come to care for her in such a short time. There was something about her quiet determination, the way she refused to give up, even in the face of uncertainty. It reminded him of the things he had lost along the way: hope, faith, and trust in people. They walked for what felt like hours, asking anyone who might know Ruth or where she had gone. The city seemed indifferent to their search, as if Ruth had never existed. Every door they knocked on was either locked, closed, or filled with indifference. But Anna kept her hope alive, and the CEO couldn't help but admire her for it. It wasn't long before they reached an older part of the city, a quieter, more neglected area that the CEO rarely visited. The buildings here were old, their facades worn down by time and neglect. The streets were narrower, and the hum of the city seemed distant. This part of town felt different, as if it held secrets that no one wanted to uncover. Anna stopped in front of a small, run-down building. It was a far cry from the polished offices and glass buildings that surrounded the CEO's world, but there was something about it that made him pause. "This is it," Anna said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The CEO looked at her, a mixture of confusion and curiosity in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked. Anna nodded toward the building. "My mom used to come here," she said, her eyes focused on the door as if she could see the past hidden behind it. The CEO hesitated. He had come so far, put in so much effort, but what if this was just another dead end? What if this place held nothing but more disappointment? But then he looked at Anna. The hope in her eyes was enough to make him push aside his doubts. "Let's go in," he said, his voice steady. They approached the door, which creaked as it opened, revealing a small, dimly lit hallway. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and old books, a smell that seemed out of place in a city so full of modernity and progress. Anna led the way, her small hand gripping the doorframe as she stepped inside. The CEO followed her, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. They moved through the narrow hall, passing old pictures on the walls, each one showing a different time, a different place. Finally, they reached a small office at the back of the building. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, the CEO could see an older woman sitting at a desk, her face hidden behind a stack of papers. Anna knocked softly on the door, and the woman looked up. Her eyes were tired, but there was something familiar about her, something that made the CEO's heart skip a beat. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice gentle but weary. Anna stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke. "I'm looking for my mom. Her name is Ruth. She worked here a long time ago." The woman's eyes widened, and she stood up quickly, her face pale. "Ruth?" she whispered, as if the name itself held some kind of power. The CEO watched in silence as the woman looked from Anna to him, her expression unreadable. "I knew Ruth," the woman said slowly, as if trying to make sense of the situation. "But she's gone. She left years ago, without a word." Anna's face fell, her hope starting to fade. But before she could say anything, the woman continued, "But I think I know where she went. She left because she had to. It was the only way she could protect you." Anna's eyes widened, and she looked up at the woman, hope flickering once more. "Where did she go?" she asked urgently. The woman hesitated, looking around as if making sure no one else was listening. "I can't say much, but there's a place where people like Ruth go when they need to disappear," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She went there to keep you safe, to give you a chance at a better life. But I don't know if she's still there. It's been a long time." Anna's face lit up with determination. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice filled with resolve. The woman looked at her, a mixture of sadness and respect in her eyes. "It's a place on the outskirts of the city. But you'll have to be careful. Not many people know about it, and those who do, they don't always want to help." The CEO's mind raced as he listened to the woman's words. This was the break they had been waiting for, the lead they needed to finally find Ruth. But as they turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What would they find when they reached this place? Would they find Ruth, or would they uncover something much darker? One thing was certain: this journey was far from over. The CEO and Anna stood at the threshold of the small building, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. The streets were quieter now, the noise of the city muffled by the weight of what they had just discovered. The woman inside had given them their first real lead, but it had come with a warning. The place Ruth had gone to, the place where she had disappeared to keep Anna safe, was not a typical safe house. It was a place hidden away on the outskirts of the city, far from the watchful eyes of the world. The CEO felt a deep unease in his chest, an instinctive wariness he couldn't shake. He glanced down at Anna, whose eyes were alight with hope, though tinged with uncertainty. She was determined, her small fists clenched tightly by her sides, but there was a flicker of fear in her gaze. "Are you sure you want to do this?" the CEO asked, his voice softer than he intended. "We don't know what we'll find there. It could be dangerous." Anna looked up at him, her face unwavering. "I have to. I need to know where my mom went. I have to find her." The CEO nodded, his thoughts swirling. He had made a promise, and despite the fear in his gut, he couldn't back down now. They had come too far. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We'll go together. Whatever's there, we'll face it." With that, they turned and started walking, their path leading them out of the city's hustle and into the unknown. The streets gradually grew emptier as they left the downtown area behind, the noise of traffic fading to a low hum. The buildings grew older, more dilapidated, their windows boarded up and cracked. The air felt heavier here, thick with the smell of rust and decay. Anna led the way, her steps confident, even though the surroundings were unfamiliar. The CEO followed, his gaze scanning the area, alert to every sound and movement. After what felt like an eternity of walking, they reached a street corner, where Anna stopped. "It's here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The CEO looked around. The place was nothing like what he had expected. The buildings were run down, some of them completely abandoned. The street was dimly lit, with only a few scattered lights. There was a strange sense of isolation here, as if the city had forgotten this part of town entirely. He looked down at Anna, who was now standing still, her gaze fixed on a faded, almost invisible door at the end of the street. "This is it?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Anna nodded. "It's the only place she could have gone. It's the only place I know." They approached the door, and the CEO's hand hovered over the handle for a moment, as if he could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He pushed the door open slowly, and they stepped into a dark hallway. The air inside was stale, and the faint sounds of voices echoed through the walls. They walked down the corridor, their footsteps muffled by the old carpet underfoot. The CEO's heart began to race. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't the sense of dread that seemed to hang over the place. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. No response. They continued walking, turning corner after corner, until they reached a small, dimly lit room at the end. The door was cracked open, and the CEO could see a figure inside, hunched over something. He knocked lightly before pushing the door open. The figure turned, revealing a man, his face hidden beneath the shadows. The man looked at them for a moment before speaking, his voice gravelly. "What do you want?" he asked. The CEO took a step forward, his voice steady. "We're looking for someone. Her name is Ruth. She came here a long time ago. We've been told she might still be here." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Ruth, huh?" he muttered, as if the name meant something to him. He looked over at Anna, then back at the CEO. "You're looking for her, huh? You don't know what kind of place this is?" Anna stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Please, she's my mom. I need to find her. She promised me she'd be here." The man stood up slowly, his gaze shifting between Anna and the CEO. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Ruth, she left, but not the way you think. She didn't come here to hide. She came here to protect you. She did what she had to do, and now, she's gone." The kind of place Ruth found herself in is not one that you can just walk into. You're not supposed to be here. The CEO felt a chill run down his spine as the man's words sank in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice strained. The man sighed deeply, as if he had seen too much in his time here. Ruth had to make a choice. And that choice led her down a path most people wouldn't understand. She knew what she was doing when she left. But now, she's not here, and she's not coming back. The words hit Anna like a blow. Her face faltered, the hope draining from her expression. But before she could speak, the man held up his hand. "But there's still a chance," he said, his voice softer now. "If you want to find her, you'll have to do things her way. You'll need to be prepared for what comes next. You have to want to change your life completely." Anna's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What do we have to do?" The man's expression softened slightly. "You'll know when the time comes. But for now, you need to get out of here. There's nothing more for you here." The CEO looked down at Anna, unsure of what to say next. The journey had taken an unexpected turn, and he wasn't sure if they would ever find Ruth. But one thing was clear: they weren't going to give up. They had to keep going. The only question now was where that would lead them. The CEO and Anna left the room in silence, their footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The man's words weighed heavily on both of them, and though Anna was still determined, there was a new sense of uncertainty in her eyes. The journey had already taken so many unexpected turns, and now, with the man's cryptic warning, they were faced with even more questions. As they stepped out into the cold air, the CEO glanced at Anna, who was staring ahead, lost in thought. He could see the pain in her eyes, the burden of a journey that had become more complicated with every step. He had promised her they would find Ruth, but with each passing moment, that promise felt harder to keep. The city around them seemed unchanged, busy, fast-paced, and indifferent. But Anna was different. She was no longer the same hopeful girl who had approached him on that street corner. She had become someone who carried the weight of uncertainty and fear, someone who had lost her way, just like he had. They walked in silence for a while, the streets growing quieter as they ventured further from the heart of the city. It was then that the CEO realized how much had changed within him as well. When he had first met Anna, he had barely known her. She had been just another face in the crowd, another lost child in a city full of them. But now, she was someone he couldn't ignore, someone whose pain had become his own. They reached a small park, where the trees had already begun shedding their leaves, a sign that autumn was giving way to the cold embrace of winter. The CEO stopped and turned to Anna, his voice soft but firm. "Anna," he said, catching her attention. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with that same determination. "We can't go back now. We've come this far. Whatever happens next, we face it together." But we need to keep moving forward. Anna nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. She knew he was right. They couldn't go back. Not now. But what do we do next? She asked, her voice small but steady. The CEO paused for a moment, thinking, we need to find someone who knows more. The man we spoke to, he said there's a place where people go to disappear. We need to find that place. Anna looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and fear. How do we find it? She asked. The CEO didn't have an answer. He didn't know where to begin, but he knew they had to keep looking. They couldn't stop now. He had promised her that much. We'll ask around, he said, his voice steady. There's always someone who knows something. We just have to find the right person. They left the park and continued walking, their search for answers taking them deeper into the city's lesser-known neighborhoods. It wasn't long before they came across a small coffee shop tucked between two old buildings. The door was cracked open, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted out onto the street. The CEO hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, the shop was dimly lit, with a few patrons scattered around, each lost in their own world. The walls were covered in local art, and the air was filled with the low hum of quiet conversation. The CEO and Anna took a seat at a small table in the corner. He glanced around, scanning the room for anyone who might know something about Ruth's whereabouts. The barista behind the counter looked up at them as they entered, his eyes briefly flicking over Anna before settling on the CEO. "What can I get for you?" the barista asked, his voice flat and disinterested. "Coffee," the CEO replied, his eyes scanning the room once more. "Black, please." The barista nodded and turned to prepare the drinks, but the CEO remained focused on the room. Anna sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "This place feels different," she whispered after a few moments. The CEO turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "It's quiet," she said softly. "Too quiet." The CEO frowned, but before he could respond, the barista returned with their coffee. He set the cups down on the table and lingered for a moment, his eyes scanning the two of them. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "No," the CEO replied, his voice cautious. "We're just passing through." The barista nodded slowly, as if weighing something in his mind. "You're looking for someone," he said quietly, his eyes flicking to Anna. The CEO's heart skipped a beat. How did he know? Was it that obvious? "Who are you looking for?" the barista asked again, his voice soft but insistent. The CEO hesitated for a moment before responding. "Her name is Ruth. She's been missing for a long time." The barista's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "I might know something," the barista said quietly, leaning in closer. "But it won't be easy, and you won't get any answers without paying the price." The CEO felt a wave of unease wash over him. What was this place? What kind of answers could this man provide? And what did he mean by paying the price? Anna looked at the CEO, her eyes wide with curiosity. The CEO didn't know what to think. "What kind of price?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension that had begun to build in the room. The barista looked around the room before speaking again. "The price of truth," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You want to know where Ruth is? Then you'll have to give something up in return." The CEO sat back in his chair, trying to process what the barista had just said. "The price of truth?" The words echoed in his mind, sending a chill down his spine. The barista had leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing, the tension in the room thickening with each passing second. He had mentioned a price, but what did that mean? What kind of cost were they talking about? Anna, who had been quiet until now, looked up at the CEO with wide, uncertain eyes. "What do you think he means?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. The CEO turned to her, his expression unreadable. He didn't know what to think. The barista was offering them information, but there was always a catch. There always was. The city outside felt distant, the sounds of the world muted by the weight of the moment. He glanced back at the barista, whose gaze never wavered. The man was waiting for a response, as if he knew the decision was hanging by a thread. "What kind of price are we talking about?" the CEO asked cautiously, his voice steady despite the unease he felt deep inside. The barista's lips curled into a small, knowing smile, but there was no warmth in it. "The truth isn't free," he replied softly. "It never is. You want to know where Ruth went, where she disappeared to, then you have to be willing to sacrifice something." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. "Sacrifice something?" the CEO repeated, disbelief creeping into his tone. "What could you possibly want from us?" The barista leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "That's not for me to decide. It's for you. You want the answers. You have to give something in return. And trust me, it's never as easy as you think." Anna shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. She seemed unsure, her usual confidence shaken by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The CEO could see the worry in her eyes, but he also saw the determination. She hadn't come this far to turn back now. They were getting closer, and she was ready to see it through. The CEO took a deep breath. He had been prepared for difficult moments, but this was different. He had made a promise to Anna, and that promise meant everything. He had no intention of backing down now. "What do you want?" the CEO asked, his voice low but firm. The barista's eyes glinted as he leaned forward again. "I'm not the one who decides," he repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "You have to ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth?" There was an uncomfortable silence, the weight of his words pressing down on them. The barista stood up, slowly walking over to the counter and grabbing a small envelope. He slid it across the table to the CEO. "Take this," he said simply. "It'll lead you to where you need to go. But remember, once you open it, there's no turning back." The CEO stared at the envelope, his hand hovering above it. The decision weighed heavily on him. He could feel Anna's eyes on him, waiting for him to make a choice. Without saying another word, the CEO reached for the envelope, his fingers brushing against the cool paper. There was something in his gut telling him that this was a turning point, a moment where everything could change. He took a deep breath, and as he opened the envelope, the barista's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk. There's no turning back. Asterisk inside. There was a small piece of paper with a name and an address. The name was unfamiliar, but the address was just a few miles away, on the outskirts of the city. The CEO looked up at the barista, who was already walking back to the counter, his expression unreadable. "This is it," the CEO said, more to himself than to Anna. Anna leaned in, her eyes scanning the piece of paper. "Do you think it's really her?" she asked, her voice full of hope and doubt. The CEO hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's the best lead we've got, and we can't stop now." Anna stood up, her resolve hardening. "Let's go," she said, her voice filled with determination. The CEO didn't hesitate. They had made it this far, and now they had a chance to uncover the truth. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, they had to keep going. As they left the coffee shop, the weight of the envelope in the CEO's pocket seemed to grow heavier with every step. The city around them was still bustling, but it felt different now. The journey they had embarked on had already changed them. And as they walked toward the address, the CEO couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The CEO and Anna arrived at the address late in the afternoon, the sky tinged with shades of orange and purple as the sun began to set. The streets grew quieter as they moved away from the more populated areas of the city, and soon they were walking through an older part of town, the buildings here far more worn than anything they had seen so far. This part of the city felt forgotten, like it had been left behind by time. The roads were cracked, the streetlights flickering, and the air had a damp, cold edge to it. The further they walked, the more the weight of the envelope in the CEO's pocket seemed to grow. The name and address on the paper were now haunting him, a constant reminder that they were nearing the end of this search, and he wasn't sure what they would find. Anna walked beside him, her footsteps steady, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there earlier. She wasn't speaking now, her mind clearly focused on the address in her hand. She had always been strong, always had a sense of confidence about her, but now, her determination seemed to be mingling with a quiet fear. The CEO could see it in her eyes. She wanted to believe that this would lead them to her mother, that Ruth would be waiting for them, but there was a small, terrifying possibility that they would find nothing at all. They reached the building. It was old, the paint peeling off the walls, and the windows were cracked. The door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. the brass handle tarnished and covered in grime. The CEO glanced at Anna, who was already walking toward it, her fingers gripping the paper tightly. She stopped in front of the door and turned to face him, her face lit by the fading light. "Do you think we'll find her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The CEO paused for a moment, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He wanted to give her an answer, something to ease the fear that had begun to settle between them, but the truth was, he didn't know. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice soft but steady. "But we have to find out." Anna nodded, her gaze never leaving the door in front of them. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time had slowed down, the moment stretching on as they both braced themselves for whatever was waiting behind that door. The CEO took a deep breath and reached for the handle. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness. They stepped inside, the air inside the building thick with dust and the scent of mildew. The light was dim, but they could make out the outlines of old furniture, a few shelves lined with books and boxes, and the faint glow of a single lamp in the far corner. The place looked abandoned, and yet, there was something about it that made the CEO feel like they were intruding. Anna stepped past him and walked deeper into the room, her eyes scanning the space, searching for any sign of her mother. The CEO followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the room as well, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Hello?" Anna called out, her voice trembling slightly as it echoed through the building. No answer. The silence was oppressive, and the CEO could feel his nerves starting to fray. He looked around, trying to find something, anything that might give them a clue as to what had happened here. He noticed a door at the far end of the room, partially open, and he motioned for Anna to follow him. She didn't say anything, just nodded, and followed him as he moved toward the door. They reached it and pushed it open slowly. This room was smaller, almost like an office, with a desk in the center and papers scattered across it. A single chair sat beside the desk, and a small, dusty bookshelf lined the wall. On the desk was a photograph, framed and faded with age. The CEO walked over to it and picked it up, his breath catching in his throat when he saw the image. It was a photo of Ruth. He recognized her immediately, though she looked younger, her face softer. She was standing beside a man the CEO didn't recognize, both of them smiling. The man was tall, wearing a suit that looked slightly out of place in the setting of the photo. He was holding Ruth's hand, and there was a warmth in their faces that the CEO hadn't seen in Ruth before. He felt a pang of recognition, a flicker of something he couldn't quite explain. Anna stepped beside him and looked at the photo, her eyes widening. "That's her," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's my mom." The CEO nodded, his heart heavy as he placed the photo back on the desk. "But who's the man?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with confusion. Anna didn't answer right away. She was staring at the photo, her hand shaking as she reached out to touch the glass. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've never seen him before." The CEO turned away from the desk, his mind racing. They had come this far, but the questions were piling up faster than they could answer them. Who was this man? What did he have to do with Ruth's disappearance? And why had Ruth left everything behind without a word? They needed answers, but the deeper they went, the more they seemed to uncover only more mysteries. As Anna stood there, lost in thought, the CEO couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He had promised to help her find Ruth, and now it seemed like they had stumbled into something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. This wasn't just about finding Ruth anymore. It was about uncovering the truth behind her disappearance, and whatever that truth was, it was going to change everything. The CEO and Anna stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of the photograph on the desk between them, unanswered questions swirling in the air like a storm that refused to settle. Anna's fingers lingered on the frame, her gaze distant, as if she were searching for answers in the image, hoping that somehow it would tell her what had happened to her mother. The CEO felt the tension in the room, the questions that seemed to echo through the silence, growing louder with every passing moment. Who was this man? And why had Ruth disappeared without a trace? He had thought they were close, but this was something else entirely. The man in the photograph was a stranger to both of them. He looked important, authoritative, the kind of person who could change everything. And that thought made the CEO uneasy. The realization that Ruth, the woman who had worked for him all those years, might have been involved with someone like this left him with more questions than answers. Anna finally pulled her hand away from the photograph and looked up at him. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. "Who is he?" she asked, her eyes pleading for an answer that neither of them had. The CEO sighed deeply, his mind racing. He didn't know who the man was, but he could sense that Ruth had been hiding something, a part of her life she had kept hidden from everyone, even him. She had always been kind, always professional, but this photo hinted at something deeper, something more complicated than he could have ever imagined. "I don't know," the CEO said quietly, his voice filled with frustration, "but I think he might have something to do with why Ruth disappeared." Anna's face fell, her shoulders slumping as the weight of the situation seemed to sink in. She had hoped that this search, this long journey, would bring her the answers she so desperately wanted. But instead, it had only brought more confusion. "What if we never find out?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What if this is all just a dead end?" The CEO reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "We will find out," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty that lingered in his chest. "We've come this far. We're not giving up now." Anna looked at him, her eyes full of doubt, but she nodded nonetheless. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this would all lead to something real. But she was scared of what they might uncover, scared of what might be waiting for them. The CEO turned back to the desk, his eyes lingering on the photograph. There had to be more to this. There had to be something, some way to piece together the missing parts of Ruth's life. He scanned the room, hoping for some clue, some sign that would point them in the right direction. His gaze fell on the stack of papers next to the photo. He reached for them, pulling the top sheet free. It was a document, a letter of some sort, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. The CEO unfolded it carefully, trying not to tear it. As he read the letter, his heart began to race. It was written by Ruth herself. The words were brief but clear. "I'm leaving. I have to. There are things in my past that I can no longer run from. I'm doing this for you, Anna. I promise I'll be back, but I need to protect you. Don't try to find me. Just know that I love you." The CEO's throat tightened as he finished reading the letter. He looked up at Anna, who was watching him with wide, anxious eyes. He held the letter out to her, and she took it from his hands, her fingers trembling as she read the words that had been written so many years ago. When she finished, she looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "She left. For me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The CEO nodded, his own emotions raw. "She did. She loved you more than anything, Anna, and she did this to protect you." Anna collapsed into the chair beside the desk, her hands covering her face as she sobbed quietly. The CEO stood there, watching her, feeling a deep ache in his chest. He had never seen her so vulnerable, so broken. She had always been strong, always been determined. But now, in the face of the truth, everything had changed. The weight of her mother's sacrifice was too much for her to bear, and for the first time, Anna seemed like the little girl she truly was, a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. The CEO turned away, his heart heavy with the realization that their journey was far from over. Ruth had left Anna to protect her, but the truth was now unraveling in ways they couldn't have predicted. The man in the photograph, the cryptic letters, and the secrecy surrounding Ruth's disappearance all pointed to something much larger than he had ever imagined. And though they had uncovered one piece of the puzzle, there were still many pieces left to find. The CEO knew they couldn't stop now, no matter how difficult or painful the path ahead might be. "We'll figure this out, Anna," he said, his voice steady, though it shook with the weight of his own emotions. "We'll find the answers. We won't give up." Anna looked up at him, her eyes red but filled with determination. "I don't care what it takes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to know the truth." The CEO nodded. "And we'll get it, together." They stood in the room, the photograph still sitting on the desk, the weight of Ruth's sacrifice hanging between them. The journey was far from over, but with each step, they were getting closer to the truth and to the answers that would finally bring closure to the questions that had haunted Anna for so long. The The CEO and Anna spent the next few days in a whirlwind of research, searching for any more clues that might lead them to Ruth. The letter had been a revelation, but it had also opened more doors to questions that seemed impossible to answer. Ruth had left, chosen to protect Anna by disappearing. But why? What was so dangerous in Ruth's past that she couldn't even tell her daughter? The CEO could feel the weight of Anna's pain as they combed through old records, visited people who might have known something, and dug into Ruth's life. Despite their efforts, the answers seemed to be just beyond their grasp. The city felt colder now, the towering buildings and busy streets seeming more distant as they continued their search. It was one evening when the answer finally came, though not in the way they expected. They had followed yet another lead. An address linked to a warehouse on the edge of town. The address had come from a source who seemed to know more than he was willing to share, someone who had worked with Ruth years ago. They had arrived at the location, but it was desolate, dark, empty, abandoned. A few boarded-up windows, a rusted door, and the quiet hum of the city far away. It felt like they were on the verge of something, but the unease that settled in their bones told them it wasn't going to be simple. "Are you sure this is the place?" Anna asked, her voice full of doubt as she looked up at the old building. The CEO hesitated, looking at the address again. This was it, but something about it didn't sit right with him. "This is the place," he said quietly. "But I don't know if we're going to find what we expect." They moved cautiously toward the door, which creaked as the CEO pushed it open. The air inside was thick with dust, the faint scent of mildew and age clinging to the walls. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The room was cavernous, filled with old boxes and scattered debris. There was an eerie emptiness to it, as though it had been forgotten by time. But as they ventured further into the room, Anna stopped suddenly. "Wait," she said softly, her voice trembling. The CEO looked at her, his heart racing. She was staring at something, her eyes wide with shock. He followed her gaze, and there, at the far end of the room, was an old metal filing cabinet. It stood out among the boxes and dust-covered crates. The door was slightly ajar, and there was a faint glimmer of something inside. Anna's hand trembled as she reached for it, her eyes never leaving the cabinet. The CEO felt his breath catch in his throat. He didn't know what to expect, but his instincts were telling him this was a turning point. Anna opened the cabinet slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, there were several old folders stacked together, but one caught her eye. It was marked with Ruth's name, written in faded ink. She pulled it out, the paper crinkling under her fingers, and opened it. Inside were more letters, photographs, and documents. The CEO stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. Anna held up a photograph, and for a moment, the room seemed to disappear. It was another picture of Ruth, but this time, she was standing next to a man, one that looked very much like the man from the previous photograph, the one who had been standing with Ruth. But there was something different in this photo. The man's expression was darker, more intense, and in the background, the familiar building they had just walked through appeared, though in a much earlier time. It was a stark contrast to the decay they had seen now. Anna's hands shook as she continued flipping through the papers. Each letter she read brought her closer to the truth, but it was painful. Ruth had been involved in something much bigger than either of them had realized. Ruth had worked for someone powerful, someone dangerous. The letters described meetings in hidden locations, coded messages, and the kind of secrecy that only the most secretive people would understand. But there were no answers about Ruth's disappearance, only a clear sense of danger, a feeling that whatever Ruth had been involved in, it wasn't something she could ever escape. "Why did she leave?" Anna whispered, her voice broken as the reality of her mother's life began to sink in. The CEO didn't know how to answer. How could he explain that Ruth had been protecting Anna from something so dangerous that she had to sever all ties, including her relationship with him? They had always assumed Ruth had just left, but the truth was much more complicated. She had gone into hiding, made sacrifices for Anna's safety. She hadn't disappeared for herself. She had done it because she loved her daughter more than anything. As Anna sat down on the dusty floor, clutching the papers in her hands, the CEO felt the weight of it all. The truth was heavy, heavier than he had ever imagined. The answers they had been searching for were in these documents, but they were also just the beginning. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it seemed to get. Ruth hadn't just been a housekeeper. She had been a part of something much larger, something that no one, including Anna, had known. But now, Anna was at the center of it, and the CEO realized that finding Ruth might not just be about piecing together the past. It might be about facing something that would change Anna's life forever. The truth had always been elusive, but now, it was undeniable. And they were both trapped in its web. The CEO watched Anna as she sat on the floor, clutching the papers in her hands. She was still reading, each letter and photograph unfolding another layer of Ruth's hidden life. The more they discovered, the deeper the mystery seemed to go, and the more Anna's world began to shift beneath her feet. Her eyes were wide, scanning each piece of evidence, piecing together a picture of her mother's secret life, a life that had been so carefully concealed. The letters described dangerous encounters, codes, and hidden locations. Ruth had been involved in something much bigger, something far darker than anyone had imagined. The CEO's mind raced as he considered the implications. He had always known Ruth had a past, but this was something entirely different. What had she been trying to protect Anna from? And why had she thought she needed to disappear completely to do so? As Anna read, her face grew more pale, her hands trembling with every new piece of information. Finally, she put the papers down and looked up at the CEO, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, hurt, and determination. "What are we supposed to do with all of this?" she asked, her voice shaking. The CEO didn't have an immediate answer. They had come this far, following clues, asking questions, uncovering more of Ruth's hidden past, but now it felt like they were standing at the edge of something much larger, something far more dangerous than they could handle. Ruth had been protecting Anna by leaving, but what if this was only the beginning? What if uncovering the truth meant exposing them both to a danger they couldn't outrun? "We need to figure out what Ruth was involved in," the CEO said quietly, his voice laced with uncertainty. "She didn't disappear for no reason. There's something more going on, something we need to understand." Anna nodded, her expression firming, though she was still visibly shaken. She had come so far to find answers, and now that she was on the cusp of learning everything, it felt as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I just want to find my mom. I don't care what it takes." The CEO stood up and looked out the window, his mind spinning. He had made a promise to Anna. They would find Ruth. But with each new discovery, the cost of that promise seemed to grow heavier. There was a darkness here, one that had been hidden for years, and now Anna was in the center of it. He knew that if they didn't act fast, they might not just find Ruth, they might uncover something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. He turned back to Anna, his expression serious. "We need to go to the address," he said, "the one in the letter." Anna looked at him, her face tight with both fear and anticipation. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it's a trap? What if we're not supposed to find her?" The CEO took a deep breath. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew they couldn't stop now. Ruth had gone to great lengths to protect Anna, and now it was up to them to uncover the truth. "We have to try," he said firmly. "Ruth didn't leave all these clues for no reason. She wanted us to find her, and we're going to." They gathered the papers and headed out of the room, the weight of the situation pressing down on them with each step. As they walked through the streets, the city felt different, almost foreign. It was as though they were no longer a part of it, but outsiders, caught in a web of secrets they didn't fully understand. The address from the letter was located in a part of the city they hadn't yet explored. It was on the outskirts, far from the busy streets they had been familiar with. The neighborhood was quieter, the buildings older, and more rundown. It was the kind of place that didn't attract attention, the kind of place people walked through without looking twice. But as they neared the location, a sense of foreboding settled over them. This wasn't just a house or a building, it felt like a threshold, a point of no return. They arrived at the address and stood in front of an unmarked door. There was nothing unusual about it, just a simple wooden door in a nondescript building, hidden among others in the quiet street. But for Anna, it felt like the door to her mother's past, and whatever lay behind it would change her life forever. She hesitated, her hand resting on the doorknob, the weight of everything that had led them here pressing on her. The CEO stood behind her, watching her carefully. This was the moment they had been working toward, but he could see the fear in Anna's eyes, the uncertainty of what was to come. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Anna turned to look at him, her expression determined. "I have to be," she said softly, before turning back to the door. With a deep breath, she pushed it open. The room beyond was dimly lit, the shadows casting long shapes across the walls. The air was thick with dust, and there was a strange stillness to it, as though it hadn't been touched in years. They stepped inside cautiously, the door creaking as it closed behind them. As they moved further into the room, the silence grew more oppressive, and the CEO's heart began to race. They were in the right place, but what would they find here? What had Ruth been hiding? The answers were close, but the cost was becoming clearer with each step they took. This journey had led them to a point where there was no turning back, and whatever they found in this room would determine everything. As Anna and the CEO stepped into the room, the air seemed to grow even heavier, the silence pressing down on them like a weight. The faint light that filtered in from a single, grimy window cast long shadows on the dusty floor, making the place feel ancient, as though time had forgotten it. It was clear this place hadn't been lived in for years, but there was something unsettling about it, something that suggested it had been left this way deliberately. The walls, cracked and peeling, were lined with old photographs, some fading with age, others nearly hidden behind layers of dust. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a few pieces of old, worn furniture. A desk sat in the corner, a stack of papers neatly arranged on top. The CEO's eyes quickly scanned the room, his instincts telling him that, whatever they were looking for, it was here. But what was it? What had Ruth left behind? Anna stepped further inside, her gaze moving from one shadowy corner to the next, searching for any sign of her mother. She had been so sure that this was where they would find the answers. She had to believe it. "Mom, where are you?" she whispered, as if calling out to someone who might be hiding in the shadows. The CEO remained quiet for a moment, unsure of what to say. The situation felt delicate, and he knew that Anna was carrying more than just the weight of their search. She was carrying the weight of the truth, a truth that had been hidden from her for so long. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but firm. "We'll find her, Anna. We have to believe that." She nodded, her face tight with determination, though her eyes betrayed the uncertainty she felt. The CEO moved toward the desk, his hand hovering over the papers. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had been left here, a clue that would finally bring them closer to Ruth. He picked up the stack of papers, flipping through them slowly. Most were old receipts, notes written in Ruth's handwriting, nothing that immediately stood out. But then he found something different. It was a small notebook, bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. The notebook was worn, as if it had been carried around for a long time. He opened it, his fingers brushing the pages, and began to read. The entries were sparse but revealing. Ruth had written about her life before she came to work for the CEO, about the people she had known, and about the things she had done. The deeper he read, the more he realized just how much she had been hiding. There were mentions of names that didn't make sense, references to places that didn't exist in any map he knew. It was like reading someone else's life, a life that didn't fit the woman he had known. The last entry in the notebook was the most disturbing. It was written just a few days before she disappeared. "I've made my decision," it read. "I can't stay here anymore. I have to protect Anna. I can't let her fall into this world. I've done what I can, but now it's time for me to disappear. I don't know what's coming next, but I will be watching over her, always." The words struck the CEO like a punch to the gut. Ruth had known she was leaving, knew she had to protect Anna, but she hadn't shared the full story with anyone. She had kept the most dangerous parts of her life hidden, and now it was clear that whatever she had been involved in was much bigger than he had ever realized. The CEO looked up at Anna, who had moved to the far corner of the room, staring at a photo hanging on the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused as if she were trying to make sense of everything that had just been uncovered. The CEO walked over to her, the notebook still clutched in his hand. "Anna," he said gently, "we're getting closer. Your mom was protecting you from something, from someone, but now, we have to keep moving forward. We can't stop." Anna turned to face him, her expression one of quiet despair. How can I keep moving forward if I don't know what I'm walking into? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. The CEO sighed, his heart heavy. He understood her fear. He felt it, too. They were so close to the truth now. But it was a truth that could tear everything apart. We don't have all the answers, Anna, he said, but we have each other. And we're not going to stop until we find them. Ruth wanted you to be safe. That's why she left, why she made those choices. But now, we have to face whatever comes next, together. Anna nodded slowly, her jaw set in determination. I don't care what it takes. I need to know the truth. For me, for my mom. The CEO placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. We'll find it, I promise. They stood there for a moment, the weight of Ruth's decision heavy in the air around them. They were standing at the edge of something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. But the journey wasn't over yet. There were more secrets to uncover, more challenges to face, and whatever lay ahead, the CEO and Anna would face it together. With renewed resolve, they left the room, the notebook tucked safely under the CEO's arm. The city outside still buzzed with life, but for them, it felt like they had entered another world entirely, one filled with danger, secrets, and the hope that the truth would finally set them free. The CEO and Anna made their way back to the car, the weight of what they had uncovered in the room still pressing heavily on them. Anna had the notebook in her hands, clutching it tightly as if it held the final key to everything she had been searching for. Her thoughts seemed to be racing, and the CEO could see the conflict in her eyes. She had wanted answers, but the answers they had found were more complicated, more dangerous than either of them had expected. As they drove through the city, the streets blurred around them, the world outside seeming distant, as if it no longer mattered. They were on the verge of something huge, something that could change everything, but the more they discovered, the more the truth seemed to slip through their fingers, like sand. I don't understand, Anna said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was thick with confusion and emotion. Why didn't my mom tell me? Why did she keep all this from me? The CEO glanced over at her, his heart heavy with the weight of the question. I think she was trying to protect you, Anna, he said gently, his voice filled with understanding. She didn't want you to be a part of this world, the world she was caught in. Anna's grip tightened on the notebook. But I'm already a part of it now, aren't I? Her voice cracked as she spoke, the realization of what had been hidden from her settling in. The CEO didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to. He didn't have all the answers, either. They were both caught in a web of secrets, but one thing was clear. Ruth had sacrificed everything for Anna's safety, and now it was up to them to unravel the mess she had left behind. They drove in silence for a while, the weight of the situation hanging between them. The CEO was deep in thought, considering their next move. They couldn't stop now. The truth was within reach. But it was starting to feel like the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. They needed to figure out who was behind everything, who was pulling the strings, and what had Ruth been involved in that made her disappear so completely. As they neared their destination, the CEO's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and checked the screen. It was a message from a contact he had reached out to earlier, a person who might know more about Ruth's past. He opened the message, and his heart skipped a beat when he read it. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th and Elm. I have information you need. The message was short and to the point, but it was exactly what they needed: a lead. The CEO quickly typed a response, asking for more details, but there was no time to wait for a reply. They had to go. He looked at Anna, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. We have a lead, he said, his voice steady but urgent. Anna looked up, her eyes immediately sharpening with focus. Where? She asked. The old warehouse on 5th and Elm, he replied. We need to get there, now. Without another word, they made their way to the warehouse, the tension in the air thick as they drove through the city. The streets seemed to grow darker as they neared the outskirts, the buildings older and more decrepit as they entered a part of the city they hadn't seen before. The area felt abandoned, forgotten. When they finally arrived at the warehouse, it looked even worse than they had imagined. The building was run down, its windows shattered, the metal doors rusted shut. It looked like no one had set foot in it for years. The CEO stopped the car, and they both got out, the cold night air hitting them immediately. Anna looked at the warehouse, her face set with determination. "This is it, isn't it?" she asked, her voice low. The CEO nodded. "This is where we find out everything," he said, his tone firm. They approached the entrance, but as they got closer, they saw something that made their hearts race. The door to the warehouse was slightly ajar, as though someone had been there recently. The CEO looked at Anna, his eyes narrowing. "Stay close," he warned. They stepped cautiously inside, the floor creaking beneath their feet. The place smelled musty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and rust. They moved deeper into the building, the faint sound of something shifting in the distance, sending a shiver down their spines. The CEO's instincts were on high alert. They weren't alone. The dim light from the street outside filtered in through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the space just enough to make out the shapes of old equipment, boxes, and discarded tools. Then they heard a voice, a low, gravelly sound that seemed to come from nowhere. "I knew you'd come." The CEO's heart stopped for a moment as he looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice steady but cautious. A figure stepped out from the shadows. The man was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. He stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate. "I'm the one who's been keeping track of your little investigation," he said, his voice cold. "I know what you're looking for." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "You know where my mom is?" she demanded, her voice trembling with urgency. The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile that sent a chill down their spines. "I know more than you think," he said, his tone laced with menace. "But getting the answers won't be as easy as you think. You've stepped into something much bigger than you realized." The CEO's mind raced, but he kept his voice calm. "What do you want from us?" he asked. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence making the room feel even colder. "I want to see if you're truly ready for what you're about to find," he said. "Because once you uncover the truth, there's no going back." The CEO and Anna exchanged a glance. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Whatever this man wanted, whatever game he was playing, they were ready. They had to be. The truth was within reach, and they couldn't stop now. The CEO and Anna stood in the dimly lit warehouse, the weight of the man's words hanging heavily in the air. His voice was low and menacing, the atmosphere thick with tension. The figure before them was a mystery, someone who seemed to know far more than they had expected, and Anna's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you mean? We're not ready," she demanded, her voice trembling with urgency. The man in the shadows didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, his face still partially hidden by the hood. "You think you've uncovered the truth," he said, his voice cold. "But the truth is never as simple as you imagine. Ruth didn't just disappear to protect you, Anna. She did it to protect everyone." Anna's breath caught in her throat as she exchanged a glance with the CEO. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just said. "Protect everyone?" she whispered. "What do you mean?" The man stepped closer, his eyes gleaming in the low light. "Ruth wasn't just a housekeeper. She was more involved than you realize. She was a key player in something much larger, something that was never supposed to come to light." Anna's mind whirled as the pieces of the puzzle began to shift, but they still didn't fit together. The CEO stood still, his own thoughts racing. What was this man talking about? How deep did Ruth's involvement go? He had known Ruth for years, and never once had he suspected she was part of something so dangerous, so far-reaching. "What is it?" the CEO asked, his voice steady but tense. "What was she involved in?" The man gave a dark smile, the kind that made the room feel colder. "You really don't know, do you?" he said with a chuckle. "She was working for a network, a powerful one. A network that's been pulling strings in this city for years. Ruth was the gatekeeper. She knew too much, and when she realized that you were getting too close to the truth, she had to disappear." Anna's eyes widened with disbelief. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's not possible. My mom, she wouldn't." The man interrupted her, his tone sharp. "You think your mother was just a simple housekeeper? You think she lived a quiet life, cleaning up after rich people? No, Anna. She was always in the middle of something far more dangerous. The words hit Anna like a slap, and the world around her seemed to spin. Her mother Ruth had been involved in something dark, something she had been hiding from her for all these years. The man seemed to relish the shock he was causing. She was involved in a criminal network, he continued, and when she realized that you were starting to uncover things, she made the ultimate choice. She sacrificed herself to keep you safe. Anna stumbled back, her hand gripping the edge of a dusty crate for support. The CEO felt his own heart sink as he processed what the man had just revealed. Ruth, the woman who had been a part of his life for so long, had been hiding a secret life, one that was far more dangerous than either of them had realized. And now, the man said, it's too late. You've already uncovered too much. The people Ruth was trying to protect you from won't let you walk away now. The CEO's mind raced, trying to piece together what he had just learned. So what happens now? He asked, his voice firm. Though he could feel the tension rising in his chest, the man looked at them both, his eyes cold and calculating. Now, he said, you're both involved. You've stepped into a world that doesn't play by the rules. You can't just walk away from this. You're both targets now, and the longer you stay, the more dangerous it gets. Anna shook her head, her mind struggling to keep up with the flood of information. I don't believe you, she said, her voice low, filled with defiance. I'm not a part of this. I'm just looking for my mom. The man's expression hardened. It's too late for that. You're already in it. And if you want to survive, you're going to have to face it head on. The tension in the room was palpable. The CEO could feel the weight of the man's words, and he knew deep down that they weren't just idle threats. Ruth had gone to great lengths to protect Anna, to hide the truth. But now the danger was closing in, and they were both caught in the middle of it. We're not afraid, the CEO said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. We're going to find Ruth. We're going to find the truth, no matter what. The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. You think you can handle the truth? He asked, his tone mocking. You think you can handle what you're about to discover? You have no idea what you're up against. The room seemed to grow colder as the man's words hung in the air, the weight of what he had just revealed sinking into Anna and the CEO's bones. They had no choice now. They had stepped too far into this world, and there was no turning back. The man turned on his heel and began to walk away, his steps echoing in the vast, empty warehouse. You want answers? He called over his shoulder. Then you'll have to play the game. But remember, the game doesn't play fair. Anna's eyes were hard, her determination reignited by the man's words. She looked at the CEO, who gave her a firm nod. We'll play, she said, her voice resolute, and we'll win. As they turned to leave the warehouse, the cold night air greeted them, and Anna's heart raced with both fear and anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, they were ready. The truth was within their reach, and nothing was going to stop them from finding it. The CEO and Anna stepped out of the warehouse into the cold night, the heavy door creaking shut behind them. The weight of the man's words still hung in the air, a constant reminder that they were now deeper into this world than they had ever intended to be. Anna's heart raced, a mixture of fear and determination pulsing through her veins. She had come this far to find her mother, and now she knew that Ruth had been trying to protect her from something far more dangerous than she had imagined. The man's cryptic warning echoed in her mind. You can't just walk away from this. You're both targets now. It felt like the stakes had just been raised to a level they could never have anticipated. The CEO didn't say anything as they walked back to the car, his mind working through everything he had just learned. Ruth hadn't just been a housekeeper. She had been involved in something much bigger, something dangerous, and now Anna was caught in it, too. He glanced at her, and for a moment, he saw the uncertainty in her eyes. She had always been strong, always determined, but now, she was being forced to face a truth she wasn't prepared for. We'll figure this out, Anna, he said, breaking the silence between them. We've come this far, and we're not stopping now. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes still distant, as though she were trying to process everything that had just happened. She had always thought her mother's disappearance was simply a result of a decision Ruth had made to leave her behind, but now she knew it was much more complicated than that. I don't know what to think anymore, she said softly, her voice barely audible. I thought I was just looking for my mom, but now I feel like I'm in the middle of something. Something I don't even understand." The CEO stopped in his tracks and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You are in the middle of something bigger than either of us realized," he said. "But we're going to figure it out together. You're not alone in this." Anna looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. "I want to believe that," she said, her voice trembling. "But what if we can't find her? What if we're too late?" The CEO shook his head. "We're not too late. We have a lead. And we have each other. That's all we need." He could see the flicker of hope in Anna's eyes as she looked at him, but he knew that the road ahead would be harder than anything they had faced so far. The man in the warehouse had made it clear that they were no longer just uncovering secrets. They were now part of something dangerous, and there was no turning back. As they got into the car, the CEO's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a message from the same contact who had sent them to the warehouse. "Meet me at the old docks by midnight. I have the information you need. Don't trust anyone." The message was simple, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. Anna looked at him expectantly. "What is it?" she asked. The CEO showed her the message, his brow furrowing in thought. "We have to go. It sounds like they know more about Ruth. This could be the break we've been waiting for." The car started, and they drove through the city once more, the streets growing quieter as they left the city center behind. The journey took them to the edge of the city, where the warehouses and abandoned buildings were more spread out, their dark silhouettes standing in the distance like looming shadows. When they reached the docks, the place was eerily quiet. The smell of salt water filled the air, and the sound of the water lapping gently against the shore was the only noise to be heard. The CEO parked the car, and they both stepped out, looking around for any sign of movement. It was nearly midnight, and the moon cast a pale light over the water. The docks were empty, the boats moored quietly along the piers. As they walked toward the designated meeting spot, Anna's pulse quickened, her steps quickening as she felt a sense of foreboding creep over her. The man's words echoed in her mind. "Your targets now." The CEO kept his gaze forward, his senses heightened. He knew they were walking into something that could change everything. As they reached the end of the dock, they saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark jacket that seemed to blend into the night. "You're here," the man said, his voice low but clear. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning them both. "You're not alone anymore." The CEO nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. "We've come to find out what happened to Ruth," he said. The man looked at them both, his expression unreadable. "And you will," he said quietly. "But first, you need to understand what you're dealing with." He stepped aside, gesturing for them to follow him. The CEO and Anna exchanged a glance before following him down the pier, the darkness closing in around them. As they walked, the man spoke again, his voice steady but filled with warning. "The people you're after, the ones who made Ruth disappear, they don't leave anything to chance. You're not just looking for a person anymore. You're hunting a shadow, a network so deep, it could destroy everything you know." Anna felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the man's words sank in. She had no idea how much further down this rabbit hole they would have to go to uncover the truth. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. The game had begun, and they were in it now, deeper than ever before. The CEO and Anna followed the man down the dock, the cold night air biting at their skin as they walked deeper into the shadows. The silence between them felt heavier now, each step echoing in the stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. The man leading them was confident, moving with purpose, but the more they followed, the more they realized they were entering a place that had been hidden for far too long. The man's warning still rang in their ears, a reminder that they were no longer simply searching for Ruth. They were about to step into a world far darker than either of them had ever imagined. The man stopped in front of a small, nondescript door at the end of the pier. It blended into the surroundings, almost invisible. But it was clear this was where they needed to be. The man turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "This is it," he said. "Once you go through this door, there's no turning back. What you find on the other side will change everything. Are you ready for that?" Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her pulse quickening at the thought of what was behind that door. She glanced at the CEO, searching his face for some sign of reassurance, but she found none. He looked just as uncertain as she felt. But they had come too far to turn back now. We have to know, Anna said, her voice firm despite the fear that was creeping into her. We have to find out the truth. The CEO nodded, his face resolute. We're in this together, he said quietly. The man nodded slightly, then reached for the door and pushed it open. A low creak echoed in the still night as they stepped into the darkness beyond. The room was cold and dimly lit, with old wooden beams supporting a ceiling that seemed to sag under the weight of years. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the corners. The door clicked shut behind them, the sound echoing in the empty space. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they could make out the faint outline of a table, chairs scattered around it, and stacks of papers and files piled high in the corners. It was a place that had been used for something important, but it had long since been abandoned. At the far end of the room, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes that blended seamlessly into the surroundings. His face was shadowed, but his eyes gleamed in the low light. I didn't think you'd actually show up, the man said, his voice smooth but carrying a hint of amusement. But here you are, ready to face the truth. The CEO stepped forward, his voice steady. We're here for the answers. We need to know what happened to Ruth. The man's lips curled into a smile. Ruth, he repeated, as though savoring the name. She was always the smartest of the bunch. But you, he paused, his eyes scanning Anna before settling back on the CEO. You really have no idea what you're stepping into, do you? The CEO felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought they were close to finding Ruth. But now, standing in front of this man, he was beginning to realize just how deep the rabbit hole went. What is it that we don't know? The CEO asked, his tone sharp. The man laughed softly, shaking his head. Oh, you know more than you think. Ruth was never just a housekeeper. She was always part of something bigger, something far more dangerous. And you, Anna, he said, turning his gaze to her, you're the key to it all. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She stepped back slightly, her voice shaking. What do you mean? I'm the key. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Ruth didn't leave just to protect you, he said, his voice cold and deliberate. She left because she knew you were the last piece of the puzzle. And now, you're being pulled into something much bigger than you realize. The CEO moved to stand in front of Anna, instinctively protecting her from the man's piercing gaze. What are you talking about? He demanded. What's this about Anna being the key? The man's eyes gleamed, and he leaned in slightly. You think this is all about finding Ruth? He said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. You're wrong. This is bigger, much bigger. Ruth was trying to protect Anna from a network that has its fingers in everything: politics, business, the very fabric of society. Ruth didn't disappear because she wanted to. She disappeared because she had no other choice. And now, Anna, you're caught in the middle of it. The weight of his words hit Anna like a tidal wave. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what the man was saying. A network? A conspiracy so vast that it stretched across every part of society? Her mother had been part of something that dangerous? She turned to the CEO, searching his face for some sign of reassurance, but all she saw was the same confusion and fear that was rising in her own chest. This isn't just about finding Ruth, the man continued. This is about stopping what she started. You're either with us, or you're against us. Anna stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean, with us? She asked, her voice trembling. The man smiled again, this time with an edge of malice. You'll see, he said cryptically. The choice is yours, but be warned, once you make it, there's no going back. The room seemed to grow colder as the man stepped back into the shadows, leaving Anna and the CEO standing at the crossroads of their journey. The truth was no longer a simple question of finding Ruth. It was a question of whether they were ready to confront the powerful forces that had been pulling the strings all along. The decision lay before them, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. But one thing was certain: whatever came next, they couldn't stop now. They had to move forward, no matter the cost. The atmosphere in the room felt even more suffocating as the man's words lingered in the air. The weight of what he had said settled heavily over Anna and the CEO. They were no longer just looking for Ruth. They were entangled in something much more sinister, something vast and intricate that had been operating beneath the surface, pulling strings and hiding in the shadows. The man's cryptic words echoed in Anna's mind. Asterisk. You're either with us, or you're against us. Asterisk. She didn't know what it meant. How could she be part of something so dark, so dangerous? She had never asked for any of this. She had only wanted to find her mother. The man, still standing in the shadows, eyed them both with amusement. He had said his piece and, for the moment, was content to let the silence stretch on, his presence looming over them like an unseen threat. "What does he want from us?" Anna whispered, her voice shaky as she turned to the CEO. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her thoughts tangled in confusion. The CEO took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He didn't have all the answers, but they had come too far to stop now. Ruth's sacrifice, her disappearance, the dark world she had been a part of, it all pointed to one thing. They were being drawn into something bigger, something they couldn't ignore. "I don't know yet," he said quietly, "but we can't back down now. We've come too far." Anna nodded, though the uncertainty still clouded her face. The man's warning echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you're either with us, or you're against us. Asterisk, could they trust him? Could they trust anyone in this web of secrets? "We need to keep moving," the CEO said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty creeping in. "We need to understand what we're up against, and we need to find Ruth, no matter what it takes." Anna looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt and fear, but also with something else, determination. She had come this far, and there was no going back. "But where do we even begin?" she asked. "How do we fight against something we don't even understand?" The CEO paused, considering her words. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Ruth had tried to protect Anna, but now it was clear that Anna was being dragged into a world much more dangerous than either of them had ever realized. "We start by finding the truth," he said quietly. "We find out who's behind all of this, who's pulling the strings, and we take it from there." Anna swallowed hard, nodding slowly. She had wanted to find answers, but now that the truth was beginning to unfold, she wasn't sure she was ready for what they might discover. But there was no turning back. She had already stepped into the unknown. The man in the shadows remained silent, watching them closely as they gathered their bearings. He didn't seem to be in any hurry to explain further. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, but the CEO and Anna both knew they couldn't let it stop them. "We have to meet the people who know what's going on," the CEO said, taking a step toward the exit. "The people who are really behind this. We have to take the next step." Anna followed him, her resolve firming. She couldn't let fear control her. Not now. She had to find her mother, no matter what it took. The man's words still hung in the air, and they were still unclear about what awaited them. But they knew one thing for certain: whatever lay ahead, it was bigger than anything they had ever faced before. They stepped out of the warehouse into the cold night air, the city around them eerily quiet. The distant hum of traffic seemed far away, as if they had crossed into a different world. The CEO glanced at Anna, his face set with determination. "We're not going to stop," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to find Ruth, and we're going to bring her home." Anna looked at him, a spark of determination lighting in her eyes. "I don't care what it takes," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to find my mom." The CEO nodded, the weight of their journey ahead pressing down on him. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. They were up against something powerful, something that didn't want them to succeed. But together, they were stronger. They had come this far, and they weren't going to give up now. The truth was within their reach, but they knew the cost of finding it would be high. The city streets grew quieter as they made their way to the next location, the weight of their mission hanging heavily between them. As they walked, the CEO's mind raced. How much further would they have to go to uncover the full truth? What other dangers awaited them? And what would they find when they finally confronted the network that Ruth had been trying to protect them from? The answers were still out there, just beyond their grasp, but they were closer than ever. The CEO knew they were on the right path. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and no matter how dangerous the journey became, he was going to see it through to the end. Anna was counting on him, and he was counting on her. Together, they would face whatever came next because the truth was worth whatever it took to uncover it. The CEO and Anna walked down the dimly lit streets, the weight of their next steps pressing heavily on them. Their destination was unclear, but the path was becoming ever more dangerous. Every twist and turn in the search for Ruth was leading them deeper into a world that neither of them was prepared for. The city felt different now, like the air itself was thick with secrets, as though the buildings were watching them, waiting for them to make the next move. Anna's mind raced. The man at the docks had warned them that they were now targets, that they had been drawn into something much bigger than they could have ever imagined. She felt the full force of his words settle over her like a heavy cloak. It wasn't just about finding her mother anymore. It was about surviving. "We have to keep going," the CEO said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension that surrounded them. "We don't have all the answers yet, but we're closer than ever. We'll find Ruth. We'll uncover the truth." Anna nodded, though uncertainty still gnawed at her. How could they possibly understand the full scope of what they were dealing with? She had no idea what forces were working behind the scenes, or how far Ruth had gone to protect her. But she did know one thing she wasn't going to stop. The truth had to come out. The CEO looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "I know this is hard, Anna," he said, "but I also know you're stronger than you think. We'll face whatever comes next, together." She looked back at him, trying to steady her emotions. I want my mom back," she said quietly, her voice breaking for a moment. The CEO's heart tightened, but he didn't let it show. He knew how much this meant to Anna. Ruth had been her whole world, and now, her world was crumbling around her. They turned a corner and came to a quiet street. The world felt empty now, the bustling city around them seeming distant and unreachable. They were walking deeper into the unknown, but they both knew that the answers were close. They just had to keep moving forward. The street ahead was lined with old, crumbling buildings, their windows boarded up, the paint peeling from their walls. It was a part of the city they had never seen before, an area that felt untouched, forgotten, like the rest of the world had moved on and left this place behind. It was a fitting place for what they were about to face. The CEO stopped in front of a building that seemed to blend in with the others. It was dark, the windows covered with grime, but there was something about it that told him they were close. Anna felt the weight of the moment settle over her. They were here. This was the place. "This is it," the CEO said softly, looking at Anna. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the door in front of them. Her pulse quickened. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew that whatever lay beyond that door would change everything. With a deep breath, the CEO reached for the door handle and pushed it open. The door creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the silence of the street. The room inside was dark, but they could make out the outline of furniture and what looked like files and papers scattered on a desk. There was a faint smell of old paper, dust, and something else, something that made the hairs on the back of Anna's neck stand on end. As they stepped inside, the door clicked shut behind them, the sound sharp in the stillness. "Hello?" the CEO called out, his voice steady, but his instincts on high alert. No response. They stood still for a moment, their eyes adjusting to the darkness. There was a sudden noise, a rustle from the back of the room. Anna's heart skipped a beat, and the CEO's hand instinctively went to his side, where he kept a small flashlight. He turned it on and pointed it toward the sound. A figure stepped into the light. The man was tall, his face shadowed, but his presence was unmistakable. He had a familiar air about him, someone who had been involved in this world longer than Anna and the CEO could comprehend. He looked at them with an expression that was both calculating and amused. "I wondered when you'd show up," he said in a low voice. The CEO narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. The man smiled, his lips curling into a small, knowing grin. "I've been watching you. You've been asking all the right questions. You're closer than you think, but you're still in the dark about a lot of things." Anna stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you know about my mom?" she demanded. The man's smile faded, and he stepped closer, his gaze cold and calculating. "Your mother knew far more than you could ever imagine. She wasn't just hiding from the people you think she was. She was protecting you from a truth so dangerous that even she couldn't risk you knowing it until the time was right." Anna swallowed hard, her mind spinning. What did that mean? What truth was he talking about? The man continued, his voice low and steady. "You're part of something much bigger now. You may not realize it yet, but everything you've uncovered, every step you've taken, has led you here. To this moment." The CEO's mind was racing. He had no idea what the man was talking about, but the pieces were slowly starting to fall into place. Ruth's disappearance, the clues, The warnings, they were all part of something far larger than either of them had anticipated. "What are you going to do?" the CEO asked, his voice firm but filled with caution. The man's gaze turned icy. "What we do next will determine everything," he said. "You have a choice to make." Anna's heart pounded in her chest. A choice? What choice? What were they supposed to do next? The man stepped back into the shadows, his figure disappearing into the dark. "I'll be watching," he said ominously, the door creaking open behind him as he vanished into the night. The silence that followed was suffocating. Anna stood frozen, her mind struggling to keep up with the storm of emotions coursing through her. They were close. The answers were within reach. But what was the price of the truth? What would they have to sacrifice to uncover it? And were they ready to face whatever lay ahead? There was no going back now. The journey was far from over. And they had no idea what the next step would bring, but they had to keep moving forward. They had no choice. The truth was waiting for them, and they would stop at nothing to find it. The night air felt colder as the door creaked shut behind them, sealing Anna and the CEO inside the dimly lit room. The silence that followed was almost suffocating, a quiet that was only broken by their steady breaths. The figure that had appeared before them in the shadows was gone, leaving behind only cryptic words that seemed to echo in Anna's mind. Asterisk. You're part of something much bigger now. You have a choice to make. Asterisk. Those words twisted in her head, each syllable weighing heavier than the last. The choice was clear in one sense: they were in this, and there was no going back. But what did the man mean? What was the truth that Ruth had been protecting her from? And what exactly did they have to face to find it? Anna's heart was still racing, her thoughts scattered. She looked at the CEO, who was just as lost in his thoughts. His usual calm demeanor was shaken, the lines of worry more pronounced on his face now than ever before. "What do you think he meant?" Anna asked quietly, her voice shaky. The CEO sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but I think we need to get to the heart of whatever this is." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You're right. There's no going back now." They both understood the weight of their situation. Ruth's disappearance was no longer just a personal matter. It was part of something far more dangerous, a vast network with power that reached deep into the fabric of society. And Anna, whether she liked it or not, was now caught in the middle of it all. The CEO took a deep breath. "We need to find Ruth, and we need to understand who's behind all of this." Anna nodded slowly. "But how do we do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we fight something so big? What if we're not prepared?" The CEO didn't have an answer right away. It felt like every step they took brought them closer to the truth but also deeper into danger. There were forces at play that neither of them fully understood, and the more they uncovered, the more dangerous the truth seemed to become. "We start by reaching out to people who know more than we do," he said finally, determination creeping into his voice. "We go to the places Ruth might have left behind, and we follow the clues, no matter where they lead us." Anna glanced at him, her face a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't care how dangerous it gets," she said firmly. "I just want to know what happened to her." The CEO nodded. He could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had fueled their journey from the very beginning. Ruth's love for Anna had driven her to make the ultimate sacrifice. Now it was Anna's turn to face whatever truth was waiting, no matter the cost. As they left the building, the chill of the night wrapped around them. They climbed into the car, the engine starting with a low rumble that felt far too loud in the quiet night. The city around them felt distant now, as if they were walking through a world that wasn't quite their own. The road ahead felt uncertain, and with each passing mile, the weight of the unknown seemed to grow heavier. Anna couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was as though the shadows were alive, following them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The streets began to look different as they drove further from the city center, the buildings becoming older, more run down. The places they passed felt forgotten, neglected, as though the world had moved on without them. But Anna knew this wasn't just about the places they were heading into the unknown, into a world filled with dangerous people and secrets that had been buried for years. After what seemed like hours, they arrived at an old, abandoned building at the edge of town. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the decaying structure. The CEO parked the car and turned to Anna, his face serious. "This is it," he said quietly. "We don't know what we'll find inside, but this could be the next step." Anna nodded, her heart beating faster. She didn't know what they would uncover, but she knew it was the only way forward. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. They stepped out of the car and approached the building, the sound of their footsteps loud in the silence. The door was partially open, and they could see shadows moving inside. The CEO's hand instinctively went to his side, his fingers brushing the handle of a small flashlight. He turned it on, shining the beam into the dark space ahead. The room was quiet, save for the faint creaking of the floorboards underfoot. They moved cautiously, the sense that they were walking into something that would change everything heavy on their minds. As they ventured deeper into the building, Anna felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something wasn't right. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and there was a strange sense of foreboding that seemed to follow them as they moved. They reached a small room at the back, and the CEO paused, his eyes scanning the area. A desk sat in the center of the room, papers and files scattered across it. There was a strange, almost unnatural stillness in the air. Anna's heart pounded as she walked closer to the desk, her eyes scanning the papers that lay there. Some were torn, others were just barely legible, but one in particular caught her attention. It was a letter, dated just a few days before Ruth's disappearance. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked it up and read the words. "I'm sorry, Anna. This is the only way. There are people who are watching us. I have to disappear. It's the only way to keep you safe. Please understand. I will always love you." The words were simple, but the weight of them hit Anna like a ton of bricks. Ruth had known this was coming. She had known the danger was closing in, and she had sacrificed herself to keep Anna safe. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she read the letter again. This wasn't just a note. It was the final message from the woman who had raised her, the woman who had given up everything to protect her. The truth was finally starting to come to light, but it was more painful than Anna had ever imagined. The CEO stood silently beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. Together, they had uncovered the truth, but now the true battle was just beginning. The letter in Anna's hands trembled as she slowly put it down on the desk, the words still echoing in her mind. Asterisk, "I'm sorry, Anna. This is the only way. There are people who are watching us. I have to disappear. It's the only way to keep you safe. Please understand. I will always love you. Asterisk." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a lifetime of decisions. Ruth had made the ultimate sacrifice, disappearing from Anna's life, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to protect her from a dangerous world she couldn't even begin to understand. Tears filled Anna's eyes as the realization hit her hard. Her mother had known. She had known the risks, the dangers that were closing in, and she had chosen to vanish, to let go of everything: her life, her work, even her connection to Anna, just to keep her safe. The room around them seemed to close in, the quiet, the darkness, and the unanswered questions all pressing in on them. The CEO stood silently beside Anna, his heart heavy with the same understanding. He had always seen Ruth as a strong, reliable figure, someone who kept her own secrets. But now he realized how deep her involvement had gone. He looked down at Anna, the pain in her eyes cutting through him. "Anna," he said softly, trying to offer some comfort. "Your mother loved you more than anything. That's why she did this. She gave up everything to keep you safe." Anna wiped her eyes, nodding, but her heart still ached with the weight of the truth. "But why didn't she tell me?" she whispered, the hurt in her voice palpable. "Why didn't she trust me enough to explain?" The CEO sighed, his voice gentle but firm. "Because she was protecting you from a world that could have destroyed you. She knew you weren't ready to face it. No one should have to face it." Anna nodded, taking a deep breath as she tried to steady herself. The truth was harsh, and it was more than she had ever expected. She had thought her mother's disappearance was just an act of abandonment, but now she saw it for what it truly was: an act of love, a decision made with the sole purpose of keeping her out of harm's way. But the cost was high. The people Ruth had been hiding from, the shadows that had been chasing her, were still out there. And now, they were coming for Anna, too. The CEO glanced around the room, his mind racing. The path ahead was clear now, but it was dangerous. There were no easy answers, no easy way out. He knew they couldn't stay here. They needed to get out of this place and find the next step. The danger was real. It was no longer just a search for Ruth, it was about survival. "We need to move, Anna," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We need to get out of here before whoever is after your mother finds us." Anna looked up at him, a sense of resolve hardening in her heart. She had lost so much already, but she wasn't going to lose herself. She wasn't going to let the danger that Ruth had tried to shield her from swallow her whole. "Where do we go?" she asked. The CEO looked at the letter one last time before he answered. "We follow the trail. Ruth left us clues. She didn't just disappear. She wanted you to find her. She wanted us to finish what she started." Anna nodded, her heart still heavy, but her determination growing stronger. They couldn't stop now. Ruth had given up everything for her. The least Anna could do was honor her mother's sacrifice by finding the truth, no matter what it cost. They left the room, the door closing quietly behind them. The night air felt even colder now, the darkness deeper. As they walked toward the car, the streets seemed even emptier, the city more distant. They had entered a new world, a world where the lines between right and wrong blurred, where people like Ruth disappeared to protect the ones they loved, and where Anna now found herself fighting to stay alive. The car's engine hummed to life, and the CEO drove with determination, his hands gripping the wheel as the lights of the city faded into the rearview mirror. They didn't know where the road ahead would take them, but they knew they had no choice but to keep going. The next step was unclear, but it was out there, somewhere, and no matter how dangerous it became, no matter what they had to sacrifice, they would face it together. The truth was closer than ever, and they weren't going to stop until they had it. For Ruth, for Anna, and for the life she deserved to live. The city stretched out before them as they drove into the unknown, but Anna felt a sense of clarity for the first time in what seemed like forever. Whatever darkness lay ahead, they would face it head on, because now, the truth was within reach, and they would stop at nothing to uncover it.